Good afternoon and welcome to the CFPB Proposed Regulations for Payday Lending webinar. This afternoon we are joined by 4 organizations. With the Center for Responsible Lending, we have Diane, Sarah with First Nations Development Institute, Ian with the National Congress of American Indians, and Stephanie with First Nations Oista Corporation. So to begin the webinar, I'd like everyone to test out the question and answer feature on this webinar platform. Please locate that at the upper center or right-hand side of your screen and answer the following question. What organization are you representing today? Awesome. I'm seeing representation from all across the nation. I'm seeing very large organizations such as Opportunity Finance Network and some folks out in Hawaii, Seneca Nation, Red Cedar Services. Thank you all so much for joining us. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to use this feature and we'll address them as they come up. At the end of the webinar, we'll also have a session that's open for question and answers. If you'd like to raise your hand, we can unmute your line and you can speak with us directly. So I'd like to start out by going over the goals of the webinar. Today we will hear a brief overview from the CFPB proposed regulations and how they were determined from the Center for Responsible Lending. First Nations Development Institute will explain the comment period and describe the content needed to generate for the comment letter for the CFPB. We'll also hear from NCAI. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will have time for participants to share stories and comments for the letter. And next, I'd like to introduce Diane with the Center for Responsible Lending, and she will describe the CFPB regulations.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for inviting me to be part of today's webinar. I really look forward to the opportunity to be part of the conversation today. To start with, on the next slide, I just want to anchor a little bit about what we're talking about today and why and how we got here. So we're going to talk about a historic moment that we have to rein in the harms of payday loans, car title loans, and unaffordable high-cost installment loans. This is due to the fact that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau earlier this summer released proposed new rules that have the potential to stop the debt trap across the country. As folks may remember or know, the CFPB was created following the mortgage crisis as part of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. And when the Consumer Financial Bureau was created to be essentially a consumer watchdog to help stop the tricks and traps of the financial services agencies with the specific goal of protecting consumers against those abusive practices, when it was created, Congress gave the CFPB explicit authority to regulate unfair, abusive, and deceptive practices for payday loans. And the CFPB has been doing this since it was up and running in about 2012, and it's done this over the last few years to understand the payday lending market and its harms to consumers through research, through field hearings, through enforcement actions against illegal practices, and other supervisory authority. But today what we really are focused on is the fact that on June 2nd, the CFPB released its proposed rules to stop these unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices for payday loans. And the reason we will talk about it today and the importance of of this moment is that the CFPB is accepting public comments on this proposed rule between now and October 7th. And so it's important to have as many voices weighing in about the need for a strong rule by the CFPB to stop the payday loan debt trap. So there is, over the last few years, that the CFPB has been moving in earnest towards this goal of releasing proposed rules. CRL and many organizations across the country have been working on this campaign, as you see here, to stop the payday loan debt trap, which is powered by more than 500 civil rights, consumer, labor, faith, veterans, and seniors, and other organizations from all 50 states, reflecting the broad-based concerns generally felt in communities and across the country to the devastation that payday loans cause, particularly to low-income communities and communities of color. So just to anchor the importance of this moment and the need for strong rules, I just want to recap a little bit about, what do we know about payday loans and the harm that they cause. So one thing that we know is that payday lenders typically charge 400% APR on average, and that payday loans are designed to be a debt trap that lead to a cascade of financial consequences, such as overdraft fees, delinquency on other bills, and even increased likelihood of bankruptcy. So as you'll see on the next slide, there's another, in part because of these high costs and these harms, payday lenders are wildly unpopular. Used car salesmen and Wall Street banks have higher approval ratings than the payday lenders, 3% approval rating, according to a recent poll among voters. On the next slide, you'll see that on the flip side, it's just as payday lenders are unpopular, the voters on both sides of the aisle really support reining in these abusive practices through increased government regulation. And this is consistent with polls and surveys among borrowers as well, who support increased protections against the harms due to these unaffordable payday loans. And so what that means is, coming off of today's webinar, if you're talking to your friends or your coworkers about what we talk about today and the need for a strong CFPB rule, is that more than likely they will agree with you, but just need to know about the opportunity that now is the time to weigh in with the CFPB to ensure a strong rule that really effectively prevents this debt trap. So how big is this problem that we have the potential to address? So on the next slide, you will see that payday lenders charge these excessive 300 and 400% interest rates on their loans in 36 states across the country. And in these states, borrowers are largely unprotected from the harms of the cycle of debt caused by payday loans. Fortunately, as you can see in the map, 14 states, plus the District of Columbia, protect against and prevent these abusive products in the most effective way possible by capping rates on payday loans at about 36% APR. So this is the current landscape of payday lending today. As shown on the next slide, these 14 states, plus the District of Columbia, have referred to themselves as Payday Freelandia, where 90 million people live and have fought hard over many years to keep predatory lending practices from expanding into their state. And new reports from Arkansas, for example, and an existing report from North Carolina document how borrowers in these states fare better when not trapped in the payday loan debt trap and have other options when payday loans are not available. And for these particular states, if you live in one of them, just wanted to note that, as you will discuss in a minute, that these states have, again, protections of a rate cap of about 36%, which is also what is in place for active duty members of the military due to the enactment of the Military Lending Act in 2006. And this authority to cap the rate and limit the cost of payday loans is something that the CFPB does not have. The CFPB is prohibited from addressing the cost of the payday loans. And so the importance of these state-level protections will remain and are in fact, as noted by the CFPB, are in fact stronger than what the CFPB can do. So it will be important for states to hold on to their rate caps where they have them, and even following the CFPB rule, states can continue to move forward and enact these stronger protections in light of the CFPB's inability to do so, and they would have the states will have the authority to do so as well. So on the next slide, highlights the reason that states have been protecting against these high-cost loans for so vigorously and for so long is because in states where these high-cost payday and car title loans exist, these small loans come at a very big cost. In addition to some of the harms referenced earlier about the cascade of financial consequences that occur and are associated with payday loans, such as bankruptcy, increased likelihood of overdraft and delinquency on other bills, these high-cost payday loans in states where they're allowed drain over $8 billion a year in fees from people whose annual income is about $25,000 a year on average. And so if you want to see how much payday loans drain from your particular state, you can click right on that link that's in the slide to see the report that we released earlier this year. Likewise, in states that effectively protect against the harms of the payday and car title lending debt trap, our research shows that consumers save over $5 billion a year in fees that would otherwise be paid on these unaffordable loans. And so again, you can click right there on the link on this slide to see how much money your state saves from these high-cost loans. And so the next slide shows, again, that the majority of these fees and the core of the payday lending business model is due to the debt trap. So research by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has shown that over 75% of all payday loan fees are due to borrowers who are stuck in more than 10 loans a year. And the data also shows that these loans are taken out in rapid succession, and with the vast majority of loans being taken out within 60 days of the previous loan being paid off. And so this evidence of the debt trap, is a function of how the payday loan is structured, with its high cost, payments due on payday, and payday lenders making the loan with little regard to whether or not they're actually affordable in light of a borrower's income and expenses, leads to this long-term cycle of debt, which drives the business model. So further evidence of this debt trap is here in black and white from the training manual of one national payday lender, Ace Cash Express, that was uncovered as part of the CFPB's enforcement actions. And it reveals how the payday lender was training their employees to really flip borrowers from one unaffordable loan into the next. And so it's this debt trap and the harms that it causes which the CFPB has the potential to address in its proposed rules. So let's talk a minute about what these proposed rules are and what they seek to do. So as I mentioned, so on the next slide, you will see a top-line overview of these rules. So as I mentioned, the CFPB is prohibited from setting a rate cap on the cost of these payday, car title, and installment loans, and that rate cap is the most effective way to address these harms. But in light of their inability to do so, the CFPB does have the ability to simply ensure that payday lenders and these high-cost lenders can't keep people trapped in unaffordable loans. And so the way they are doing that is through an approach based on requiring lenders to assess a borrower's ability to repay the loan. So this approach that the CFPB is taking is the heart of the proposal. And this approach, the CFPB's ability to pay approach, which essentially is based on requiring lenders to look at both income and expenses, is the right approach for the Bureau to be taking. And but, as we'll talk about in a minute, there are significant loopholes that must be closed. And that's the importance of what we're talking about today and the importance of weighing in with the CFPB between now and October 7th to close some of these dangerous loopholes. So just to clarify as well, the scope of the CFPB rule, again, covers payday loans, car title loans, and certain high-cost installment loans. And it reaches these loans regardless if they're made with short-term repayment periods or structured as longer-term loans. And again, that broad scope is in covering both short-term and long-term loans, and covering payday, car title, and high-cost installment loans is a helpful approach. But let me just briefly discuss some of these loopholes that remain. The first category of loopholes that we are concerned about in the CFPB's approach is a set of loopholes that will essentially allow lenders to continue business as usual. So these loopholes are in the way that payday lenders actually would apply the ability to pay retest requirements to their loans. And because of these loopholes, the rule is not yet strong enough to ensure that people have enough money to live on after making the loan payment. As one example of this business as usual loophole, the CFPB is contemplating allowing lenders to simply say, because they don't have reborrowing rates or default rates that are any worse than other payday lenders, that they must be doing okay. And that just sanctions too low of a bar and sanctions the dangerous debt trap business model that we have today. So it'll be important to close this business as usual loophole to actually ensure that people have enough money to live on after they've repaid the loan. The second big category of loopholes that we're concerned about is that the rule does not go far enough yet to prevent against the dangerous flipping of unaffordable loans, of lenders being able to flip borrowers into one unaffordable loan after the next. And this concern about needing to strengthen protections against flipping exists for both the short-term loans and the long-term loans. So just very briefly, because the flipping protections are not yet strong enough regarding short-term loans, under the current construct of the rule, somebody can still be stuck in 10 short-term loans in a year. And in terms of the longer-term loans, the CFPB proposal did not yet go far enough to prevent serial refinancing of longer-term loans in a way that prevents the refinancing from simply masking an unaffordable loan on which the borrower would otherwise default. And so those protections need to be strengthened as well. And then finally, the rule still leaves too many dangerous high-cost loans not covered by its reach or subject to the ability to repay test. So there's these dangerous exceptions to the ability to repay requirement. One of these types of exceptions is the fact that the rule is contemplating allowing payday lenders to make up to 6 300% interest rate loans to a borrower in a year. That a borrower could still have 6 of these high-cost payday loans in a year that are not subject to any ability to repay test. So we have seen over time that even a single unaffordable 300% interest rate loan can cause harm that then 6 300% interest rate loans that are not subject to any ability to repay requirement is 6 loans too many. And then for longer-term loans, the CFPB is considering allowing exemptions for longer-term high-cost installment loans that have high origination fees that also would not be subject to these ability to repay requirements. And then even high-cost loans at 300% APR in which the lender takes access to the bank account or to the car 73 hours after the loan is made, those wouldn't be subject to it either. So there's these dangerous exceptions to the ability to repay test that we'll need to close. And so that's, on the next slide, that's what our important charge for us between now and October 7th is tell our stories and to tell how our communities have been harmed by payday loans so that we can tell the CFPB to close these loopholes to ensure lenders can't keep trapping consumers in a cycle of debt. And so the way we can do that, the way we can tell the CFPB to close the loopholes is, as you'll see on the next slide, and as we mentioned several times, that the comments on the proposed rule are due to the CFPB by October 7th of 2016. And there's 2 ways that you can easily do that. If you live in a state that has payday or car title lending, these dangerous high-cost installment loans, you can go to stoppaydaypredators.org/CRL, and there's a comment box that's easily can be easily personalized and submitted to the CFPB. Or if you live in a state that is in one of these 14 states plus the District of Columbia that does not have these high-cost dangerous loans, you can go to stoppaydaypredators.org/payday-free to talk about the importance of the rule not undermining the strong laws that you already have in place, and to share the experiences of people being better off without these dangerous loans. So as we weigh in with the CFPB, I'm going to talk about 2 reasons why the CFPB needs to hear from you, and I know Sarah is going to talk in a little bit more detail as well. So in the next slide, you'll see a summary of what we hope to see in a strong rule by the CFPB. And the way that we get to a strong rule is for them to hear from you about closing and fixing some of these weaknesses in the proposal. So what would a strong rule look like? Number 1, it would have an ability to repay test based on both income and expenses with no exceptions, and that we'd apply it to every single loan where the lender takes control over the borrower's checking account, car, other property, or wages. Second, the rule would have stronger protections against flipping loans. It would ensure that borrowers can't be stuck in so-called 2-week loans for 3 months or more, and would prevent serial flipping of these longer-term loans. Third, the rule should enhance strong state laws and not undermine states that prohibit these high-cost loans and could deem a violation of state law an unfair practice. And finally, the CFPB should close these loopholes to ensure that lenders can't just game the rule in a way that leaves borrowers without enough money to live on. So we can make those known to the CFPB, but the other way that we really can strengthen the rule of the CFPB and is important to ensure that the CFPB finalizes a rule that is strong at protecting against the debt trap is shown on the next slide, is to make sure the CFPB has sufficient evidence and a lot of evidence about the harm that payday loans cause to people that we care about and the people in our communities. And so I think Sarah is going to talk a little bit about this next, but just to highlight what do we mean by helping the CFPB understand the harm that's caused by these loans is, these very concrete details of what we know happens when people are stuck in these loans. So if you have seen or heard of people who have experienced the following with a payday, car title, or high-cost installment loan, these are the type of details that the CFPB will need to hear from you. So the one, if it's clear that the loan was not affordable in light of their income and expenses, or the borrower needed to quickly reborrow the loan 1 or more times, they experienced penalty fees charged by the bank or payday lender, or after making the loan payment, the borrower could not pay for other basic living expenses such as rent, utility payments, or other bills. The borrower is subject to aggressive debt collection or experienced emotional stress. These are the types of stories that will be important to collect and to share with the CFPB between now and October 7th. And so now I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about some of their efforts on that front.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarah from First Nations Development Institute. And what you'll see on the next slide, thank you, Diane, for that overview of what's happening with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And what you'll see on this slide in front of you is that First Nations Development Institute and First Nations Oista Corporation have actually been looking at this issue for a very long time. And part of the reason for that is First Nations Oista Corporation and First Nations Development Institute work very closely with community institutions on Indian reservations and in Native communities. So we work very closely with Native CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, but we also work closely with housing authorities, tribal colleges, other community organizations. And we're often teaching financial education, but sometimes we're also working with CDFIs on their loan policies and credit counseling and things like that. And so we started to hear a lot of stories about problems with individuals who are really struggling with debt. It wasn't always payday loans, but it was a whole different type of, a whole range of loans, including a lot of car loans, sometimes they're called signature loans, and payday loans, consumer loans. So we started to see a pattern here, and we consulted with our CDFI partners and other partners, and really heard a lot of consensus from these community practitioners who were on the ground that many different types of loans, and specifically payday loans, were causing a lot of financial harm, emotional stress, problems for individuals who were either trying to clean up their credit or maybe take out a loan to purchase a home. So we really started to see the importance of addressing this. And we, at First Nations OESA and First Nations Development Institute, believe very strongly in financial education and coaching, but we started to realize that there is a need for some sort of regulation that really looks at financial products and the impact that these products have on individuals. So as a result, in 2012, I can't believe it was 4 years ago, I believe we worked with the Center for Responsible Lending because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had started the process of receiving comments, looking at high-cost lending and payday loans, and trying to understand some of the data and some of the personal stories out there. So we did write a letter, or I should say we submitted comments, and we really, I would say, through our existing network, started to collect stories from mostly CDFIs, lenders who had, welcomed a client into their office and did some financial coaching and found out, wow, there's a lot going on here that has to do with either payday loans or these kind of short-term, high-cost loans. So to echo what Diane said, I think it's really that we're having this webinar because we think it's so powerful to hear these stories from the field, and this is an opportunity to, for you, many of you on this webinar work with clients who come in for financial coaching or counseling or to receive financial education. But we'd love to hear your stories and to see how people in your community are affected by payday loans. But I will just share with you two stories that we submitted comments last time, and then we submitted an addendum to the comments that included some stories we heard from our community partners. And we actually had 5 cases, but I'll just read you the first 2. I was rereading them today and realizing that they really meet all those criteria that Diane had laid out. So case 1 was one Native Community Development Financial Institution had a client with 10 payday and signature loans, 10 active loans, and we believe that indicated a lack of underwriting by the lenders. That individual probably did not have the ability to repay all 10 loans. She was an older woman and had tried to help her family by taking on some of their loans in addition to her own. And when she came into this, it was actually a CDFI's office, she was very stressed out and worried because she regularly received phone calls from the lender threatening her with collections, and in one case with jail. The stress was negatively affecting her performance in the tribal office where she worked. So she received financial counseling from the CDFI in order to help her consolidate her loans and pay off the highest interest loans first. But it still took her 2 years to pay off all of her debts, her loans, and she had to delay her retirement for 2 years to pay back her creditors. So that one was an example of someone who probably, at some point in time, shouldn't have been given additional loans. The good news is, obviously, with some assistance, she was able to pay them off and get fully out of debt. The second case also comes from a community development financial institution, and they had a client that came in with a payday loan obtained online, and it had $90 in fees every 2 weeks and renewed automatically. And so the credit counselor at the CDFI provided financial counseling and offered her a debt consolidation loan, so she agreed to that. But when the credit counselor tried to figure out how to pay off the payday loan, he had trouble identifying who owned the company, and he finally traced it to a website to an offshore company in Nevis, which is just west of Antigua. And so he tried to contact them to identify, well, how do you pay off the principal? What do I need to do? And he was told that they would not accept payment to satisfy the principal, so you could not pay off the, what was left on the loan. So he, had to go to a lawyer and figure out how to resolve this loan. And after he got legal advice, he did just send off a payoff check to the company offices with a cover letter saying I am paying off this loan. And the good news is that did resolve the loan. And the client ended up paying over 300% of the original loan balance, and the annual percentage rate on that loan was around 600%. So those are just two cases, and you kind of see how those cases really reflect a lot of issues related to, giving, lack of underwriting, lack of reviewing somebody's ability to repay a loan, but also just terms that are really, really hard to, abide by. So I've got a few more here, but in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and just wrap this up and say, if you guys have anybody on this webinar has similar stories, we'll be giving out our emails at the end of the webinar, and you can certainly contact us over email or give us a call if that's easier, because we would like to hear any stories from the field that you may have, because we feel like there's a lot of these kind of challenges out there, but they're not always really captured and communicated directly to the CFPB, because our goal is to probably submit a comment, or at the very least just submit some of these stories so the CFPB understands how some of these high-cost loans are affecting Native communities. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ian Record, and he's going to talk a little bit about the work of NCAI, and he is the director for the Partnership for Tribal Governance. So next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ian Record, Partnership for Tribal Governance of the National Congress of American Indians. I just wanted to briefly go through some of our efforts and initiatives to enhance financial asset building in Indian country, enhance financial education, financial capacity building efforts across Indian country. I'll go through these briefly, and I welcome any questions you have about this, and I'd be happy to share out some web links to some of these initiatives after the webinar wraps up. The first thing I wanted to talk about was our NCAI's Protect Native Money initiative, and this was really the brainchild of my predecessor, Sherry Salway Black, who many of you probably know. She's a pioneer in the field of Indian country financial education. This effort really got underway with the Cobell and Keepseagle settlements a few years ago. And they were really, this initiative is really designed to educate Native people about how they can best protect their newfound assets against consumer scams, predatory lending, and other similar nefarious schemes, and also enhance their ability to grow those assets over time. So, for instance, we were successful in getting some financial education materials included in the offers that went out. I'm sorry, not the offers, but the settlement payments that went out to individual Native people that received settlement checks through Cobell and Keepseagle. We're also working currently with some of our financial education partners, including the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, the Native CDFI network, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, to sort of get a sense of where financial education stands around the Cobell settlement as it continues to evolve. For those of you who have been tracking Cobell and how it's being implemented, just a couple months ago, it was announced that another 36 or so tribes are going to be going through the Cobell land buyback program process in the next couple of years or so. So what we're trying to do is be proactive in identifying those tribes, building partnerships with those tribes to say what other sort of financial education components do you want to bring to bear to help educate your own people about how they can protect their money, grow their money, and not fall prey to some of these horror stories that have been shared already today. I want to talk next about the Native CDFI network. This is a national organization that represents Native CDFIs across the country, the more than 70 Native CDFIs, and I believe we have some of the other board members from NCN here on the webinar today. The Partnership for Tribal Governance at NCAI has had an ex officio role on the NCN board over the last few years, and the partnership is also working on the NCN's Data and Impact Committee, and that's to try to get a better handle on what sort of impact are Native CDFIs having when it comes to the asset building capability of Native people across Indian country. And that's everything from their ability to support citizen entrepreneurs and starting their own businesses, to actually some native CDFIs offering short-term small dollar loans to native people that they serve. Not all native CDFIs do that, but some do. And we're working to better document those options that native people have in some tribal communities from native CDFIs to borrow money from them at far more affordable rates than what you find with some of these predatory payday lenders. Next is our Native Financial Education Coalition. This is an effort that's been underway for about 15 years now. It was originally in the hands of First Nations Awisa, and then over the last few years, NCAI has taken over stewardship of this. This is a network of Native financial education advocates and experts who convene every couple of months to share best practices, get on the same page in terms of where things like the CFPB rule is, and what Native communities, Indian countries as a whole, should be doing on these various financial education-related issues. And we have a website called nfec.us, and you can go there and learn more about the effort. And we're always looking for contributions to our NFEC newsletter. It's an email newsletter that we send out about 6 times a year. It's really got a wide network of folks that are interested in these issues. Next is Native in the Bank. This is a relatively new initiative of ours, and this is really designed to get Native youth to understand the importance of and then engage in saving their money. So the initiative started last year. We did a year one pilot where we invited Native youth to start a bank account, a savings account. And part of that initiative, the challenge to Native youth, was to go through a basic financial education about what saving is, why it's important, how it can contribute to their ability to be self-sufficient and independent later in life by helping them grow their assets at a young age and then building that up over time. We have taken what we've learned from year one of this initiative, and we are revamping Native in the Bank, and we'll be relaunching that version 2.0 of that initiative next spring. And so if any of you are interested in learning more about this, I strongly recommend you connect with me. We're really trying to identify what are the best ways to get large groups of Native youth engaged in this sort of challenge, overcoming the anxiety of developing that relationship with a banker at their local banking institution, going through that basic financial education to get a sense of the responsibility they can take on their own behalf to steward and grow their own assets. And then finally, I just wanted to briefly mention NCAI's role in the passage of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. NCAI was instrumental in the passage of this legislation, in particular protecting the rights of tribal governments on par with that of state governments to regulate financial issues within their own jurisdictions. And so when it comes to the CFPB rule, for instance, that means that tribal nations need to be consulted, just like state governments are being consulted with how this rule has been designed and how it will be revised according to the comment period, and then how it will ultimately be implemented. So in closing, I just wanted to share, echo one thing that Sarah mentioned, which is we too want to hear the stories, the innovative tribal approaches that are underway to protect Native consumers and build financial capability among Native people. One of the fundamental roles of the Partnership for Tribal Governance is to document tribal innovation, tribal best practices, and we're really starting to key in on this area and looking at which tribes are doing a really innovative, strategically focused job of protecting their consumers from just these kinds of predatory lending practices.
Great, thank you, Ian. Next, I'll just launch a quick poll. We had one ready. So if you could answer the following question. Do you have clients that have taken out payday loans? I'll give you just a few moments to cast your votes. Oh, we have about 30 people who haven't responded, 30%, sorry. Just a few more seconds. And it looks like about 58% of you have clients that have taken out payday loans. So that's quite significant. So next, I'd like to open it up for a question and answer section. If anyone has any questions, could you please type them in the question and answer field of the webinar platform? Or if you'd like to, please feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute your line. Well, while you think of any questions you might have for our panelists, oh, we have a few coming in. Oh, someone says they do not have anything right now. One person asked, do you know of any tribes that have enacted consumer protection laws? I will send that question over to Ian or Diane or Sarah.
Yeah, this is Sarah at First Nations, and it looks like Ian was encouraging people to share stories about if you know of any tribes that have enacted consumer protection laws. And Ian and I have talked offline. You know, First Nations did a research report. It was probably 4 years ago now. I believe there were about, at the time, really only about 8 or 10 tribes that have enacted some consumer financial protection laws. I know the Blackfeet tribe had a consumer financial protection law that also included an interest rate cap. The Navajo Nation, of course, has a commission that looks into consumer products and problems with if there's any concerns about consumer protection. But we would love to hear from you, the webinar participants, if you've got any examples as well, because I know that tribes are taking initiative and passing their own consumer protection laws.
Great. We have another question. Would the submission of our story be directed to the CFPB, or who would they be directed to?
This is Sarah. I can answer that. Thanks for your question. I believe the next slide, Stephanie, do you want to advance to the next slide? It does have email addresses for me, Sarah, but and also for Stephanie. And so you can feel free to send your story to us, although Diane also did share, if you prefer to submit your comments directly, feel free to do that as well. And my understanding is that Stephanie, after the webinar is over, she'll send you an email, send everybody on the webinar an email that does include some links to places you can go to submit your comments. But if you prefer your comments be part of a larger sort of, or your stories be part of a larger comment, feel free to send them to me and Stephanie. And what we would do after we hear from you is let you know how we're going to use the story, make sure you're comfortable with that, share the comment with you, and then submit it by, Diane, I think, said October. I'll make sure we submit it by the deadline. So.
And we have one more question. Are there any native videos educating people to not use payday loans out there?
This is Sarah again. I am not. I'm not aware of any. Are any of the other webinar speakers?
This is Ian. I know that underway at Blackfeet is an effort called the Pecuni Money Awareness Campaign, and they've launched this in advance of their Cobell land buyback program being implemented there. The offers, I believe, are going to be going out to landowners on the reservation next month. And it's my understanding, I've not seen any videos, but it's my understanding they've got a pretty comprehensive multimedia campaign underway for this that I would imagine includes videos. This is something we're going to be tracking and trying to document as best as we can all the different tools and components that they've developed in order to educate their own people about the dangers of not being smart with your money. It appears that Blackfeet's really learned their lesson from other tribes in Montana in particular who've already gone through Cobell, and they've heard some of the horror stories of citizens of those other tribes being ripped off and that sort of thing. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I just had a few comments that said that having a video campaign would be great for the youth. So does anyone have any remaining questions or comments? Do any of the panelists have any last comments they'd like to share?
This is Sarah. No, just thank you, and we'll look forward to hopefully hearing from you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ian and Diane and Sarah, for joining us. Someone asked will they be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint, and I will be following up with everyone with an email full of resources, and please share your stories. If you have them, share them with me, Stephanie@owista.org, or Sarah S. at firstnations.org. And we look forward to hearing from you all and compiling this amazing letter to go to the CFPB. And as always, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletters. That's where we put out most of our information, and you can sign up for amazing webinars such as this one. And thank you so much for joining us. We host these webinars pretty regularly and look forward to seeing you in the future. And please look out for my email this afternoon. Thank you.